everybody! Today, Honey is going to read a few chapters of Wayside School Get a Little Stranger, written by Louis Tracker and illustrated by Tim Houch. Chapter 1 Explanation. For 243 days, a lonely sign hung on the front of the old school building. Wayside School closed for repairs. On some days, a child would come, look at the sign, then sadly walk away. Or else a child would come, look at the sign, stand on her head, then sadly walk away. Louis watched them come and go, but he never say hi to them. He hid when they came. It was his job to repair the school. Louis used to be the yard teacher at Wayside School. He passed out balls and played with the kids at recess and lunch. When the school closed, the children were sent to other schools. Horrible schools. No two kids were sent to the same school. Louis was afraid he'd cry if he talked to them. But he worked hard. For 242 days, he kept pushing and pulled. He pushed and pulled, shoveled and mopped. He never left the building. At night, he slept on the couch on the teacher's lounge on the 12th floor. Some days it seemed hopeless. The worst part was the smell. He often had to run and stick his head out a window to get a breath of fresh air. But whenever he felt like quitting, he thought about those poor kids stuck in those horrible schools, and he just worked harder. And at last, 243 days later, the school was ready to open. Well, almost ready. There was one little problem. Suddenly, from somewhere inside the building, or maybe just inside his head, Louis heard a loud moo. He put his hands over the ears and said, "I don't hear it, I don't hear it, I don't hear it," until the mooing stopped. He had scrubbed and polished every inch of Wayside School. There was no cows anywhere. He was sure of it. Still, every once in a while, he heard something go moo, or at least he thought he did. He took the sign off the door. But before you enter, you should know something about Wayside School. Wayside School is a 30-story building with one room in each floor, except there is no 19th story. Mrs. Jules teaches the class on the 30th story. Miss Zerves teaches the class on the 19th story. There is no Miss Zerves. Understand? Good. Explain it to me. "Louis!" someone shouted. He turned to see a red and blue overcoat running toward him. "Hi, Shuri," he said. He couldn't see her face, but he knew she had to be somewhere inside her coat. Shuri jumped into his arms. "I bet you're glad to be back," said Louis. "You bet," said Shuri. "Now I can finally get some sleep." All around the playground, old friends are getting back together. "Hi, old pal," said John. "Hi, hey, good buddy," said Joe. "Bibi!" yelled Calvin from one side of the playground. "Calvin!" shouted Bibi from the other. They ran and smashed into each other. "Hi, Eric. Good to see you," said Eric. "Hey, good to see you too," said Eric. "Oh, look, there's Eric." "Hi, Eric. Hi, Eric. Hi, Eric. Hi, Eric." Even Kathy said hello to everybody. "Hey, big ears," she said to Myron as she slapped him on the back. "What's happening, Smiley?" she asked Damien. "You didn't take a bath for 243 days, did you?" "Hi, Allison. Did you get uglier while you were away, or were you always this ugly and I just forgot?" "That's a nice sweater, Kathy," says Allison, who always tried to say something nice. Kathy moved on to Terence. I'm sure glad to see you, Terence," she said. "You are?" said Terence. "Yes," said Kathy. "I thought you'd been in jail by now." Todd came running across the playground. "Hi, Todd," shouted Shuri right in Louis's ear. Todd kept running. "Hey, Todd," called Jason. "Good to see you." "Hey, Todd." called Myron and DJ, but Todd didn't answer. He just kept running until he reached the school building. Then he kissed Wayside School. Out of all the schools, Todd had been sent to the very worst one. It was awful. The first thing he had to do every morning was... Wait a second. I don't have to tell you. You already know. Todd was sent to your school. Chapter 2. A message from the principal. Damien hurried up the stairs. He couldn't wait to see Mrs. Jules, his favorite teacher in the whole world. But in the 30th floor was a lot higher than he remembered, even if there was no 19th. By the time he got up there, his legs hurt, his side ached, and he had a blister on the back of his ankle where it rubbed against his sneaker. He stumbled into the room and collapsed on the floor. "Hi, Mrs. Jules," he gasped. "Hi, Damien. Welcome back," said Mrs. Jules. Damien looked up at her. Something seemed different about her, but he wasn't sure what it was. "Oh, Damien, would you do me a favor?" she asked. "Sure," said Damien. "I left my pencil in the office," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you mind going down and getting it for me?" "No problem," said Damien. "It's yellow," said Mrs. Jules. "It has a point at one end and a red eraser at the other." Damien got to his feet and headed down the stairs. One by one, the other children staggered into the room, huffing and puffing. They were all out of shape. Still, they were very excited to be back in Mrs. Jules' class. Shouts of joy could be heard from every corner of the room. Mrs. Jules held up 2 fingers. All the children became quiet. Joy stopped shouting. Mrs. Jules told the children to sit at their old desks. "So, did anyone learn anything at your other schools?" she asked. Mac raised his hand. "Ooh, ooh," he grunted. "Yes, Mac," said Mrs. Jules. "Civilization," declared Mac. "What about civilization?" asked Mrs. Jules. "We learned it," said Mac. "That's very impressive," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you like to tell the class about something about civilization?" Mac thought a moment. "I don't remember," he said, "but I know we learned it." "That's good, Mac," said Mrs. Jules. "Anyone else learn anything?" Rondi raised her hand. "Evaporation," she said. "Good," said Mrs. Jules. "What is evaporation?" "I don't know," said Rondi. Dana raised her hand. I learned about exaggeration," she said. "It was all my teacher ever talked about. We had like 10,000 tests on it, and the teacher will kill if you didn't spell it right." "That's very good, Dana," said Mrs. Jules. "You learned your lessons well." "I did," said Dana. Mrs. Jules shrugged. "Well, I guess we'll just continue where we left off." Just then, Mr. Kidwater's voice came over the PA system. "Good morning, boys and girls." Mr. Kidwater was the principal. He paused a moment because he thought every kid in the school was saying, "Good morning, Mr. Kidwater," back to him. Nobody said it. Cherry buried her head under her huge coat, closed her eyes, and went to sleep. "Welcome back to Wayside School," said Mr. Kidwater. "I know I'm sure glad to be back. It was wonderful to see all your bright and chipper faces this morning. I missed every single one of you. And welcome back to Miss Mush too. Today's lunch menu will be baked liver in purple sauce. Miss Mush actually cooked this before the school was closed, but she assured me it is still as tasty as ever." "I'm sure it is," said Myron. A safety reminder. "Now, it has been a while since you had to rush up and down the stairs, and I want to make sure there is no accident. So remember this simple rule. When you go up the stairs, stay to your right. When you go down the stairs, stay to your left. That way, there should be no problems. Okay, let's all have a good day, and remember, I'm your friend, and you're my friends. And if you ever need a friend, you can always come to me." "Isn't that nice?" said Mrs. Jules. "What a bunch of baloney. There I was lying on a beach in Jamaica. Then suddenly, I got a fax that the dumb school was back open. Well, those kids better not bother me. My friends, that's a joke. Like, I would really want to be friends with those little snot nose. What? Don't tell me to shut up. You shut up. What, John? You mean they're hearing what I'm just right this very second? Well, how do you turn it off? What button? I don't see a red button. There is no red button. Oh, here it. Chapter 3, Poetry. Mrs. Jules told everyone to pick a color and write a poem about it. Huh? Said Joy. For example, said Mrs. Jules, if brown was your favorite color, you might write, At the circus I saw a clown. On his face was a great big frown. His sad eyes were big and brown. Could you repeat that just a little bit slower? Asked Joy. Mrs. Jules repeated it for her. Ooh, I'm going to do purple, said Rondi. Rondi loved anything purple. You can't do purple, said Allison. I'm doing it. So, said Rondi, Mrs. Jules didn't say two people couldn't do the same color. But purple is my favorite color in the world, said Allison. Rondi and Allison were best friends, but Allison always got her way. Rondi switched to blue. Joe raised her hand. I don't know what rhymes with red, he said. Mrs. Jules gave him a few suggestions. Bed, led, wed. Think of words that end in ed. Oh, I get it, said Joe. He set to work. Rondi tried to think of words that rhymed with blue. She raised her hand. Mrs. Jules, she said, I chose blue. Can I rhyme with that with zoo? Yes, that would be a good rhyme, agreed Mrs. Jules. How about glue? Asked Rondi. Yes, that rhymes too, said Mrs. Jules. Ooh, I know, said Rondi. How about stew? Just pick on and get startled, said Mrs. Jules. Rondi smiled. This is fun, she told Allison. There are lots of words that rhyme with blue. Allison grunted. Nothing rhymed with purple. In her mind, Allison had gone through every letter of the alphabet. Purple, 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 durple, all the way to zurple. But after making a big stink over it with Rondi, she couldn't switch colors now. Rondi was just about to start her poem when she got an even better idea. Love that's true. Poets are always writing about love that's true, aren't they, Mrs. Jules? Sometimes, said Mrs. Jules. Rondi smiled, except she really didn't know much about true love. Morning dew, she said. Poets write about morning dew too, don't they, Mrs. Jules? I believe so, said Mrs. Jules. Dana walked to Mrs. Jules's class. I can't think of anything that rhymes with pink, she complained. I'm sure you'll think of something, said Mrs. Jules. She winked at her. I can't think, said Dana. My mind's on the blink. I'm no good at poetry. I think. Just keep trying, said Mrs. Jules. Dana returned to her seat. She started to put her name on her paper, but her pen wouldn't write. Great, she complained. Now my pen's out of ink. Hey, Dana, whispered John. Do you want to borrow my pen? Sure, said Dana. Too bad, I'm using it, said John, and he and Joe cracked up. Meanwhile, Allison was going through the alphabet for the 10th time. Murple, nurple, urple, purple, she thought. My left shoe, exclaimed Rondi. You better choose something, Rondi, and get startled, advised Mrs. Jules. I get it, said Rondi, a bird that flew. At the end of the day, the children turned in their poems. Yellow, by Kathy. I don't feel too well, oh. I don't know who to tell, oh. I'm thick and I smell, oh. My birth is yellow. Green, by Stephen. The swimming pool had lots of chlorine. It turned my hair green. Brown, by Joy. At the circus I saw a clown. On his face was a great big frown. His sad eyes were big and brown. Red, by Joe. The fire truck is red. It hurried. The siren railed. The house burned. The fireman saved the baby who screamed. Pink, by Dana. My favorite color is pink. John is a rat pink. Purple, by Allison. The baby won't stop crying. His face is turning purple. Will anything make him feel better? I bet a bird will. Blue by Rondi. That was as far as she got.